When I found the crumpled hotel receipt in the pocket of his jeans, I didn't scream. I didn't cry either. I remember staring at the paper as the washing machine hummed behind me, its rhythm steady, almost mocking. The ink on the receipt was smudged, but the name of the hotel was still legible. It was one of those quiet business-class places on the edge of town, the kind of place that prides itself on silence. I stood there in the laundry room, my fingers trembling as I held the damp paper. The faint scent of detergent mixed with the cologne he always wore, that cedar musk blend I used to love. For a moment, my mind tried to find an innocent explanation. Maybe he'd had a meeting. Maybe a conference ran late. But the date was too recent. Just last Friday, the night he'd told me his flight was canceled and he had to stay in another city. The air felt heavy. I remember the fluorescent light above flickering once, as if the room itself knew something had broken. That was the night I realized forgiveness might not come easily this time. But back then, I didn't know that forgiving him would turn into the very reason he'd destroy me later. I didn't know that my choice to stay would hand him the power to end the life we'd built, not with fists or fury, but with the cold precision of someone who once knew exactly how to love me. Before all this, our life looked perfect from the outside. We lived in a quiet suburb just outside Raleigh, North Carolina. A 2-story brick house with a porch swing and a maple tree that shed red leaves every autumn. Our neighbors were kind, the kind who waved from driveways and brought pies at Christmas. I taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. My husband, Daniel, ran a small construction company that built family homes like ours. We met in college. He was studying civil engineering. I was majoring in elementary education. He had that quiet confidence that drew people in without effort. When he laughed, it came from deep in his chest, genuine and disarming. Back then, I believed kindness was a permanent quality, not something people could outgrow. We got married at 25 in a small church with white lilies and soft piano music. My father walked me down the aisle. My mother cried softly, her handkerchief pressed tight against her cheek. Daniel looked at me with eyes full of promise, the kind of look that makes you think you're walking into forever. The early years were sweet. We'd wake up to coffee and pancakes on weekends, watch old movies on the couch, argue over whose turn it was to do the dishes, and make up before bedtime. There was laughter, warmth, and the simple comfort of routine. I used to say he was my calm in a noisy world. But life, I learned later, doesn't fall apart all at once. It unravels quietly, one small thread at a time. We had 2 children, Olivia and Max. Olivia was 8, imaginative and bright, always scribbling stories in her notebook. Max was 5, obsessed with dinosaurs and perpetually sticky from whatever snack he'd been eating. Our evenings were loud, messy, full of life, the kind of noise that makes a home feel alive. Daniel was a good father in those days. He'd kneel to tie Olivia's shoes before school, lift Max high above his shoulders, and let him roar like a T-Rex. He was proud of his family. Or maybe he liked how we looked, the image of happiness, a testament to his success. His business started growing around our 10th year of marriage. He'd come home late, smelling of sawdust and asphalt, his phone buzzing with client calls. I used to admire his dedication. "You're building something big," I'd tell him as he poured a glass of whiskey at midnight. He'd smile, tired but satisfied. "For us," he'd say. I believed him. Our life revolved around small rituals: Sunday morning pancakes, movie nights, Friday dinners with friends. He'd tease me about my habit of labeling leftovers. I'd joke about his inability to fold laundry. It was domestic, ordinary, perfect in its own way. Looking back, I can see the small cracks that began to form long before I noticed them. The way he'd check his phone during dinner and smile to himself. The way his cologne lingered longer some nights. The way he'd come home and shower immediately, as if washing off something more than sweat. But love makes you blind, or maybe just hopeful. The first time I sensed something was off, it was over breakfast. He'd started making 2 cups of coffee every morning instead of 1. I asked him about it once, and he said it helped him stay awake for early meetings. But one morning, while cleaning the travel mugs, I noticed one had faint traces of lipstick, a shade I never wore. I wanted to ask, but the kids were at the table, and his voice carried that easy calm that disarmed questions before they were asked. He leaned over, kissed my forehead, and said, "You worry too much." Emma, he always called me that way, soft, almost amused. Like I was a child with harmless anxieties. Weeks passed. His trips became frequent. He claimed new contracts were pouring in from out of state. I told myself this was success, the thing we'd worked for. But inside, something felt wrong. The house felt quieter when he wasn't there, but not in a peaceful way, in an uncertain, hollow way. Our neighbors loved us. At block parties, we were the couple that still held hands. Daniel was charming, helpful, the man who fixed everyone's porch lights and carried heavy boxes for the elderly. People adored him. One afternoon at a neighborhood barbecue, I noticed a woman I didn't recognize standing too close to him. Her laugh was sharp, rehearsed. Daniel introduced her as a client. Her name was Melissa. She was pretty in that polished way. Perfect hair, manicured nails, expensive perfume. I remember shaking her hand, smiling politely, and telling myself it was nothing. But later that night, when I hugged him before bed, I smelled the same perfume faintly on his shirt collar. That was the first time I cried quietly in the bathroom. Not because I knew, but because I didn't. The hotel receipt came months later. By then, Daniel had started locking his phone, something he'd never done before. When I asked, he said his clients shared confidential plans. I accepted that answer too easily, because doubt felt like betrayal. After finding the receipt, I waited until he returned from work. The kids were asleep. I stood in the kitchen, the paper folded in my hand like a confession. "Daniel," I said softly. He looked up, surprised by my tone. "What's wrong?" I held the receipt out. "You want to explain this?" He froze for a second, then forced a laugh. It's business. You know how it is. Business on a Friday night? You said you were stuck in Atlanta." He exhaled, rubbed his temples. "Emma, you're making something out of nothing. You always do this." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But his eyes didn't meet mine. He looked at the counter instead, at the leftover lasagna I'd made hours earlier. I didn't push. I went upstairs, sat on our bed, and stared at the framed photo from our wedding. 2 people smiling like they had forever ahead. That night, I didn't sleep. 3 days later, he came home early, flowers in hand. The air smelled of lilies and regret. "I messed up," he said quietly. I felt my body stiffen. "It was one night," he continued, voice trembling just enough to sound human. I swear it meant nothing. I was tired, drunk, angry. I don't even know why it happened. His words fell like glass on tile. I should have screamed. I should have thrown those flowers at his face. But I didn't. I just stood there, numb, listening to my heartbeat echo in my ears. When he saw I wasn't leaving, he cried. Real tears, the kind that blur truth and performance. "I don't want to lose you, Em. Please, I'll fix this." And somehow, against every instinct, I believed him again. Because forgiveness felt easier than starting over, because our children still needed their father. Because I still remembered. The man who once built me a porch swing. On our first anniversary, we went to therapy. We made lists of boundaries and promises. He deleted his work trips from the calendar. For a while, it felt like healing. He called me during lunch, left sticky notes on the fridge that said, "Love you," helped with homework, planned weekend getaways. Our friends said we were stronger than ever. I smiled and agreed, though deep inside I felt like I was walking on glass. Sometimes I'd wake at night to find him staring at the ceiling. "You okay?" I'd whisper. "Yeah," he'd say. Just thinking about work. But his voice carried that distant tone, like he was thinking about something else entirely. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's a daily negotiation between what you know and what you choose to live with. One evening, months later, I found him in his office, staring at his computer screen. He quickly closed a window when I walked in. "What was that?" I asked lightly. "Just invoices," he replied too quickly. He smiled, kissed my cheek, and changed the subject. I wanted to believe this was our second chance. That love could survive infidelity. That he'd learned. That we'd both learned. But trust, once cracked, never returns to its original shape. And though I didn't know it yet, Daniel wasn't rebuilding. He was planning something far worse than an affair. Something that would take everything I'd forgiven him for and turn it into a weapon. The months that followed the confession were strangely quiet. Too quiet. Daniel and I went through the motions of reconciliation. We met the therapist once a week, talked about trust exercises, and made eye contact during sessions as if that alone could rebuild what we'd lost. But inside me, something stayed unsettled, like a clock that still ticks but has already stopped keeping time. At first, he seemed genuinely remorseful. He'd text me sweet things, "Thinking of you, dinner tonight," and he even volunteered to pick up the kids from school. He'd never done that before. For a while, I told myself this was progress, but then the patterns began to shift again. He'd sit longer in his truck before coming inside, scrolling on his phone. When I asked, he said he needed a moment to decompress. I wanted to believe that. Everyone needs quiet after work. But that quiet started stretching into isolation, a curtain drawn between us, one that no amount of forgiveness could pull back. I remember one evening vividly. The house smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, the kind of meal that usually drew him to the table before I even called. But that night he stayed in his office, door shut. When I knocked, his voice came sharp, almost startled. "Just a minute." I waited, holding 2 plates. When he finally opened the door, he smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry, Em, got caught up with invoices." Behind him, I noticed the glow of his laptop screen, a spreadsheet maybe, or emails. But something about the way he minimized it made me uneasy. During dinner, he barely spoke. He chewed slowly, eyes fixed on his phone, thumb tapping every few seconds. "Work again?" I asked, forcing a light tone. He looked up, blinked. "Yeah, you know how it is." I nodded, though I didn't. Olivia asked if he could help her with her science project later. He smiled at her, but it was a practiced smile. "Sure, sweet pea," he said. He never did. That night, I lay awake listening to the faint clicking of his keyboard downstairs. I wanted to go down to see what he was doing, but I didn't. I'd promised myself, and the therapist, that I would trust him again. Trust, I learned, doesn't return with grand gestures. It rebuilds through small truths. But Daniel had started replacing those small truths with convenient lies. One Friday, he said he was driving to Charlotte for a meeting. His phone location still showed Raleigh. I noticed because Max had asked me to track Daddy's drive time, a little game they played. I watched the blue dot on the map stay still. When he came home that evening, he smelled faintly of bourbon. "Long day," he said. I wanted to ask. Long day where? But the word stuck in my throat. Later, when he slept, I scrolled through his messages. Nothing. Everything was deleted, even the harmless group texts. That emptiness told its own story. The next morning, he made pancakes with the kids as if nothing had happened. I watched from the hallway, trying to decide which version of him was real. The man who laughed with flour on his nose, or the one who lied with steady calm. In therapy, our counselor Janet asked me, "Do you feel safe in this relationship now, Emma?" I hesitated. Daniel looked at me, waiting. "Yes," I said finally. "We're getting there." Janet nodded slowly. "Forgiveness doesn't mean silence. If you sense something's off, you have to name it." Daniel squeezed my hand. "We're fine," he said for both of us. But we weren't. Around that time, Daniel announced he was expanding his company. He spoke about new partners, bigger contracts, a possible new office downtown. I might need to move some funds around, he said one night, casually, while we folded laundry. Business loans take time. I'll use our savings temporarily, I froze. Our savings? For the kids' college? Just short term, he assured. I'll replace every penny once the deal closes. He said it so smoothly that I almost believed him. But the next day, I checked our account. Several transfers had already been made. When I confronted him, he smiled. You said you trusted me, remember? That line hit harder than any argument could. One afternoon, my friend Marcy dropped by. She'd always been blunt, the kind of friend who noticed what others avoided. She leaned on the counter, sipping coffee. You sure things are okay with Daniel? I forced a laugh. Why? Just heard from Todd. They've been bidding on a project Daniel said he already landed. Seems he's saying one thing to one person and another elsewhere. I shrugged. Maybe he's negotiating. Marcy studied me quietly. You look tired, Em. I'm fine. But I wasn't. My stomach had that sinking feeling again, the one I'd had when I first found the hotel receipt. Daniel started locking his office drawers. When I asked why, he said the kids had been touching his files. It made sense, until I saw him hide the key in his wallet. He'd also begun making secretive phone calls in the garage. Once, when I stepped in unexpectedly, he ended the call mid-sentence and smiled. Client trouble, he said. His voice was too light, his expression too controlled. That night, after everyone went to bed, I tiptoed into his office. I tried the drawer handles and locked. But there on the edge of the desk was an envelope marked for deposit only. It had our joint account number crossed out and another number scribbled beneath. I copied it down before he came home. The argument started returning, small at first. He'd accuse me of being suspicious. I'd accuse him of being distant. You can't keep punishing me for the past, he said one night. I'm not, I whispered. But you keep repeating it. He turned away, jaw tight. You're impossible to please, I almost apologized. Reflex, habit. Then I caught myself. No, I said softly. I'm just tired of being lied to. His silence that night said everything. A week later, I went to the bank. I told the teller I wanted to inquire about a possible duplicate account under Daniel's name. She looked hesitant. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't disclose private accounts without authorization. I smiled politely. Of course, just... Could you tell me if this number belongs to this branch? She frowned, glanced down, then nodded slightly before catching herself. I'm afraid I can't say. That was all I needed. That night, I asked him again about the transfers. He sighed dramatically. You don't trust me, do you? I stayed quiet. He walked away, muttering, Maybe I should have left when I had the chance. Those words lodged deep. A few evenings later, our neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, caught me in the yard. I saw Daniel at the bank this morning, she said casually. He looked busy. New truck, too. Must be nice having business doing so well. I froze. Daniel had told me he was meeting a supplier out of town. That night, he came home later than usual, whistling softly, smelling of new leather. New truck? I asked. He grinned. Leased. For work, my throat tightened. We hadn't discussed any lease. We had dinner at my parents' house that weekend. They'd always adored Daniel, and my father especially. Over roast beef and mashed potatoes, Dad asked, So, son, business booming? Daniel laughed. Keeping busy, my mother smiled. That's wonderful. You two have been through enough. Nice to see things steady again. I looked at him then, at how easily he fit into the conversation, how his lies slipped through the air like well-worn shoes. That was when I realized Daniel wasn't just lying to me. He was building a narrative, one where he was the victim, the hard-working husband trying to make up for a wife who never forgave him enough. One night, I heard his phone buzz on the dresser while he showered. A message preview flashed. It's done. Transfer cleared. My chest tightened. I took a photo of the screen before it locked. When he came out, I pretended to sleep. His movements were quiet, deliberate. The next morning, he was gone before sunrise. For the next few weeks, he acted kinder than ever. He made breakfast, planned a weekend at the lake, even bought me a necklace, something he hadn't done in years. "You deserve to feel loved again," he said. I wanted to believe him. I wore the necklace every day, but kindness that sudden felt like camouflage. Then one morning, while paying bills, I logged into our account and froze. The balance was almost zero. All our savings, the kids' college fund, the emergency account, gone. I felt the room spin. The receipt in my hand blurred. My breath came shallow. When I called the bank, they confirmed multiple transfers made over several weeks to a private business account under Daniel Harris, LLC, a company I'd never heard of. I hung up, numb. He walked in minutes later, coffee in hand, smiling. "Morning, beautiful." I just stared at him. That was the first morning I truly saw my husband not as the man I loved, but as a stranger living behind his smile. The morning light slanted across the kitchen counter when I saw the missing zeros. Every screen I opened, the joint savings, the college fund, even my small rainy day account, showed the same thing. Nothing. I sat there barefoot, the tile cold under my feet, and tried to breathe. Outside, a lawnmower hummed faintly, steady and normal, while my life was dissolving on the screen. Daniel had left early, leaving his mug in the sink. The smell of his coffee still lingered, bitter and familiar. For a long minute I stared at the balance, then refreshed the page as if the numbers might correct themselves. They didn't. I called the bank. The woman on the line was polite, but firm. "The transfers were authorized electronically," she said, "all bearing Mr. Harris's signature and login credentials. Can you tell me where they went? I'm afraid I can't share recipient account details without a subpoena." Her voice blurred into background noise. I thanked her, hung up, and felt the kind of stillness that happens right before a storm. I tried Daniel's phone, straight to voicemail. I texted, "We need to talk. Urgent." No reply. By noon, I drove to his office on Westlake Boulevard, the small suite with the polished glass door that once made me proud. The parking lot was empty except for his new truck. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and printer toner. His receptionist's desk was cleared. The nameplate was gone. The door to his office was ajar. I pushed it open. The room looked stripped, drawers empty, filing cabinet bare. Only the framed certificate from his contracting board still hung crooked on the wall. My heart began to race. On the desk lay an envelope with my name scrawled across it. I opened it. Inside were 3 lines written in his neat, deliberate handwriting. "You said you wanted honesty. This is me being honest. You should have left when you had the chance." No signature, no explanation. That was when I understood. This wasn't a relapse. It was planned. That afternoon, I called our family lawyer, Greg Patterson. He'd handled our mortgage and wills for years. His voice tightened when he recognized me. "Emma, I was meaning to call you," he said carefully. "Daniel came by last week with new documents. I assumed you'd discuss them." "What documents?" He hesitated. "He filed to dissolve the partnership in your joint trust. Everything, house, vehicles, investments, is now in his business's name." I felt my pulse in my throat. "He can't do that without my consent." He presented a signed release. "I never signed anything." Greg exhaled softly. "Emma, I'm sorry. The signature looks convincing." I thanked him, barely hearing my own voice, and ended the call. I stood there in the driveway, wind whipping through the maple tree above, and realized the man I'd forgiven had studied my trust in the same way he studied blueprints: measurements, timing, precision. He came home at dusk. The sun had turned the sky a violent orange, the kind of color that makes everything look unreal. I met him at the door, envelope in hand. "Where is it, Daniel?" He blinked, calm as always. "Where's what?" "The money, the accounts, our savings. What did you do?" He brushed past me, dropped his keys on the counter. I moved it. Why? He shrugged, poured water from the fridge. Because I earned it. I stared at him. We built this together. He took a slow sip. You built the image, I built the life. My hands trembled. You stole from your children. He laughed softly, almost pitying. Don't be dramatic. They'll be fine. You always land on your feet, Em. Where is it? Gone, he said simply. Don't make this harder. I stepped closer. You did this on purpose. He met my eyes. Of course I did. You forgave me like a saint, but you never looked at me the same. I could feel it every day. The pity, the superiority. So I evened it out. His words landed like cold stones. You call this even? I call it closure. Then he walked upstairs as if we'd argued about groceries. That night, I tucked Olivia and Max into bed while trying not to shake. Mommy, is Daddy mad at you again? Olivia whispered. I forced a smile. No, sweetheart, just grown-up stuff. She studied me. You look sad. I kissed her forehead. It's just been a long day. When I turned off the light, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Eyes red, mouth tight, a stranger wearing my face. The next morning, I woke to an email from our mortgage company. Payment declined. He'd stopped the auto debit. I called him. What are you doing, Daniel? I told you to leave the house, he said calmly. It's in my company's name now. You can stay for a few weeks if you need time. You can't just... I can, and I have. Don't make this ugly. He hung up. That was when the fear hit. Not the kind that makes you cry, but the kind that freezes your body. By noon, I found the lockbox on our front door replaced. The code didn't work. I called the realtor's number printed on the new sign in the yard. Yes, Mrs. Harris, the woman said, cheerful and unaware. Your husband mentioned you'd already relocated. Relocated where? Oh, I assumed you knew. By the end of the week, everyone in our circle knew. He'd told people I'd taken money, that I'd ruined the accounts with reckless spending while he'd tried to fix things. Friends stopped calling. At the grocery store, I felt eyes following me. Marcy came by with a sympathetic hug. He's saying a lot, Em. People think you're filing bankruptcy. I should have, I muttered. She looked at me carefully. You need proof. I have none. He erased everything. She hesitated, then said, There's one thing he can't erase, his ego. That sentence stayed with me. A week later, while sorting through a backup drive from his old office computer, I found a folder labeled Client Docs 2017. Inside were PDFs, spreadsheets, and a subfolder named Holdings. My hands shook as I opened it. Dozens of transfers, company registrations, and offshore accounts, all linked to his new business, Daniel Harris, LLC. Each transfer corresponded to withdrawals from our joint funds. I printed every page. At the bottom of one document was a digital signature, his, and beneath it, forged copies of mine. For a moment, rage overtook the fear. I realized I wasn't just a victim. I was a witness to a crime. When he returned that night, I waited at the kitchen table, papers spread out like evidence in a courtroom. He glanced at them and smirked. You've been busy. This ends now, I said quietly. You forged my signature. He shrugged. Prove it. I will. He stepped closer, eyes cold. You think anyone will believe you? You're a teacher with a nervous breakdown. I'm the businessman who tried to save our family. My pulse raced. You planned this because I forgave you. Why, Daniel? What did I do that made you hate me this much? He leaned forward. You didn't hate me enough. You kept loving me like I was broken. That's worse than anger. Then, he smiled, the same gentle smile he'd once given me over coffee, and walked away. 2 days later, a courier arrived with legal papers. Notice to vacate. He'd filed for separation and claimed sole ownership of the house. I sat on the porch steps as the courier drove off, holding the envelope. The wind rustled the maple leaves overhead. The world looked the same, yet nothing was. Olivia came outside clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Are we moving, Mommy?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going somewhere new." Max tugged at my sleeve. "Will Daddy come?" I couldn't answer. That night, after the kids were asleep, I packed quietly. Each drawer I opened was a memory. The first birthday card he'd written, the seashell Olivia had collected from our beach trip, the flannel shirt that still smelled faintly of his cologne. I sat on the bed and cried, not loud sobs, but the silent kind that come from somewhere deeper than grief. When the tears stopped, I looked around the room and whispered, "No more." It wasn't defiance yet, just exhaustion. But exhaustion has a way of becoming strength once it runs out of tears. I left the next morning. The kids and I drove to my sister's place 2 towns over. Her small house smelled of cinnamon and safety. "You can stay as long as you need," she said, wrapping her arms around me. For the first time in weeks, I let someone hold me. That night, I lay awake on the pull-out couch, listening to Olivia's soft breathing. My world had collapsed, but beneath the wreckage, a strange calm began to settle, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to lose. The next morning, I opened the folder of documents again. The evidence was clear: forged signatures, hidden accounts, tax evasion. Daniel thought he'd destroyed me. What he didn't know was that I'd spent my whole adult life teaching children how to find truth, how to notice small details, how to stand up when something felt wrong. Now it was my turn to learn from my own lessons. I called Greg, the lawyer. "I found proof," I said. He listened quietly, then said, "Bring it tomorrow morning. And Emma, don't tell him you have it." Before leaving town for the meeting, I drove past our old house. A moving truck sat in the driveway. Daniel stood on the porch, directing workers with the same calm authority that had once built our life. He looked up as my car slowed. For a second, our eyes met. No anger, no apology, just indifference. I drove away. That was the moment I understood. What real betrayal feels like. It's not the explosion. It's the silence afterward. In Greg's office, we laid out every document. His eyebrows lifted as he read. "Emma, this is enough for a civil and criminal case." I nodded, voice steady. "I don't want revenge. I just want justice." He smiled faintly. "Then let's start there." As I signed the paperwork, I realized I wasn't signing for destruction. I was signing for closure, my own, not his. The morning light through my sister's kitchen window felt different. Soft, gentle, not filtered through fear. I woke before everyone else, made coffee, and sat by the small table watching steam rise from the mug. It was the first quiet I'd had in weeks. No footsteps on the stairs. No distant voice explaining, excusing, defending. Just birds outside and the faint ticking of the wall clock. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt empty. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it sits beside you, calm and patient, waiting for you to notice its weight. When my sister Laura came down in her robe, she studied my face. "You didn't sleep," I smiled faintly. "I don't remember the last time I really did." She poured herself coffee and sat across from me. "What's next, Em?" "I don't know," I whispered. "But I can't let him keep doing this." Laura reached over and took my hand. "Then start where you are." Those words stayed with me. Start where you are. That afternoon, I returned to the files I'd collected. Bank statements, transfers, screenshots, forged documents. I sorted them by date, marking patterns. Daniel hadn't just taken money. He'd set up a network of fake invoices, transferring funds into shell accounts before moving them again. For the first time, the teacher in me resurfaced, methodical, precise, analytical. I made a timeline connecting every thread. Laura leaned over my shoulder. "You sure you want to dig through all this?" "I have to," I said. He counted on me breaking down. I scanned each document, backed them up on a flash drive, and labeled it Truth. It felt small, but it was a start. The next morning, Greg greeted me with tired eyes and quiet respect. "You did your homework," he said, flipping through the files. He planned this for months, I told him. I was busy forgiving him while he was busy erasing me. Greg sighed. "This is financial fraud, Emma. You can file for asset recovery and criminal forgery. It'll be a fight, but it's winnable." "I'm not afraid of a fight anymore." He nodded. "Then we'll begin. I'll file for an injunction to freeze his business accounts." Hearing those words gave me a strange calm. Not joy, but clarity. For the first time since the betrayal, I wasn't reacting to him. I was acting for myself. Returning to work was harder than I expected. The hallways smelled of chalk and coffee, and the children's laughter echoed through the classrooms. My colleague Karen hugged me. "I heard," she said softly. "You don't have to explain." I nodded, grateful for her kindness. Teaching gave me something Daniel couldn't touch: purpose. Each day, standing in front of my students, I felt pieces of myself return. When I spoke to them about courage or integrity, I wasn't just teaching. I was reminding myself what those words meant. 2 weeks later, I received notice that Daniel had filed a defamation counterclaim. He accused me of lying, of damaging his reputation, of attempting to sabotage his professional standing. I sat on the porch steps holding the papers, heart pounding. Laura came outside, drying her hands on a towel. "What now?" "He's trying to bury me in lawsuits," she frowned. "You're not alone this time." Her confidence gave me strength I didn't know I still had. I called Greg. "He's fighting dirty," I said. He chuckled. "That's good." It means he's scared. The first court hearing felt surreal. The wood-paneled walls, the smell of old paper and tension. Daniel sat across the room in a dark suit, confident, polished, the same charming man everyone still believed he was. Our eyes met briefly. He smiled. When my lawyer presented the evidence, the forged signatures, the transfers, the shell companies, Daniel's face tightened for the first time. The judge frowned. "Mr. Harris, do you have any response?" Daniel shifted. "She's misinterpreting business transactions." Greg leaned in and whispered, "He's cornered." Outside the courtroom, Daniel caught up with me. "You think this makes you strong?" he hissed. I met his eyes calmly. "No, it makes me free." The news spread quickly. Once the filings became public, neighbors who had believed Daniel began changing their tone. Mrs. Caldwell stopped me outside the grocery store. "Emma, I'm so sorry." "We didn't know," I smiled politely. "You couldn't have." Rumors shifted. The whispers that once followed me with pity now carried something different. Respect, but I didn't care for vindication. I just wanted peace. Olivia had started wetting the bed again. Max grew quiet, refusing to talk about his father. One evening, Olivia asked, "Why did Daddy do it?" I knelt beside her. Sometimes people hurt others when they're hurting themselves. But it's never your fault. "Do you still love him?" she whispered. I thought for a moment. I love who I thought he was. But I don't love what he became. She nodded slowly, as if understanding more than her age allowed. A month later, Daniel emailed me. "We don't have to keep fighting. Let's end this quietly. I'll return some funds if you drop the case." I stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't remorse. It was negotiation. I replied simply, "No. You don't get to choose peace after destroying it." I didn't send it right away. I rewrote it softer. "I just want the truth acknowledged." Then I hit send. He never replied. One evening, while grading papers, I caught a news report about Daniel's company. The anchor mentioned a pending investigation for tax fraud. My breath caught. Greg had told me he'd forwarded evidence to the state's attorney. For the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt something closer to release. Karma, I thought, doesn't always need help. Sometimes it just needs time. I used part of the recovered assets to rent a small house near the school. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a patchy lawn, creaky floors, but it was ours. The first night there, Olivia helped me hang curtains. "It's smaller," she said, "but it feels happy." She was right. The space felt lighter, freer, unburdened by lies. I stood at the window watching the sunset, the same shade of orange that once marked my breaking point. Only this time, it didn't hurt. Weeks later, a certified letter arrived from Daniel. Inside was a single page. "You win." I hope it was worth it. I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, not out of sentiment but closure. He wanted the last word. But silence, I realized, was mine. Every morning, I walked the kids to school. The world still had traffic, bills, deadlines, but it also had small joys again. The smell of rain on pavement, Max's laughter, Olivia's hand in mine. Sometimes healing isn't about becoming who you were before. It's about learning to live differently after. One afternoon, Greg called. Daniel's facing charges. They found forged documents in his company's audit. I sat down slowly. Will he go to jail? Possibly. You'll be asked to testify, I hesitated. Do I have to? You don't, but it may help you finish this. I thought of all the nights I'd spent wondering why me. Maybe the answer wasn't revenge. Maybe it was justice. I'll testify, I said. In court, my voice didn't shake. I told the truth, simply, clearly, without bitterness. Daniel avoided my gaze. When the verdict came, guilty of fraud and forgery, he lowered his head. I didn't feel triumph. I felt release. Afterwards, Greg said, "You handled that with grace." Grace. The one thing Daniel could never take from me. That night, I sat on the porch of my small house, listening to crickets and the distant hum of traffic. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh beginnings. I thought about forgiveness, how I'd given it once and been punished for it, yet somehow found it again, this time for myself. I whispered into the quiet. I forgive you, Daniel. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. Months later, I accepted a promotion at school, assistant principal. My life had settled into a rhythm. Work, kids, quiet evenings. Occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of our old life in dreams, the porch swing, the laughter, the illusion of safety. But even in dreams, I never missed the fear. One morning, while helping Olivia with homework, she asked, "Mom, how do you know when to stop forgiving someone?" I smiled softly. When forgiving them keeps hurting you more than healing you. She nodded, thoughtful. That night, after they went to bed, I sat by the window, writing those words down in my journal, not as advice, but as memory. The morning it all went public began like any other. I was pouring cereal for Max when my phone started vibrating nonstop. At first, I thought something was wrong with the school group chat. Then Laura called. "Emma, turn on Channel 7, she said. Her voice trembled between shock and satisfaction. On the screen, Daniel's photograph appeared beside the headline, "Local contractor charged with fraud and forgery." My breath caught. They read out details that only lawyers had known. Shell companies, forged signatures, misused client funds. Then the anchor said my name. His wife, Emma Harris, provided key documentation in the investigation. For a moment, the world went very still. I looked at my children. Olivia's spoon hovered midair. "Mommy, that's Daddy," I knelt beside her. "Yes, sweetheart. He made mistakes. But remember what we talked about. Telling the truth always matters." Her eyes filled. "Is he going to jail?" "I don't know," I said softly. "But we're going to be okay." By afternoon, the whole town was buzzing. Parents at school whispered in hallways. Colleagues stopped by my classroom pretending to check lesson plans but really wanting the story. Marcy cornered me by the vending machine. "You did it, Em. Everyone finally knows." I smiled faintly. I didn't do it for them. Still, it was strange watching people shift. The same neighbors who'd crossed the street to avoid me last year now waved kindly, as if kindness could erase their doubt. Mrs. Caldwell brought over a pie. "You must feel vindicated, dear." I thanked her, though vindication wasn't the word. What I felt was lighter, not happier, just the weight gone. The trial for sentencing drew reporters. I didn't plan to attend, but Greg insisted closure was healthier when witnessed. The courtroom smelled of polish and nerves. Daniel stood at the defense table, thinner, suit hanging loose. For the first time, he looked small. When the judge pronounced 18 months of incarceration and restitution of stolen assets, a murmur rippled through the gallery. Daniel's lawyer whispered to him. He just nodded. He turned once toward me. No glare, no smirk, only exhaustion. For a heartbeat, I almost pitied him. Then I remembered the forged papers, the locked drawers, the night I'd packed our children's clothes in silence. Justice, I realized, isn't joy. It's balance returning after a long tilt. A week later, the school board invited me to speak at an ethics workshop. They wanted a real-life example of resilience. Standing at the lectern, I felt my hands tremble. Sometimes, I began, doing the right thing doesn't look heroic. It looks lonely. It looks like being the only person still standing in a room full of doubt. But truth has a way of waiting. It doesn't disappear. When I finished, the room stayed silent for a moment. Then people began to clap. Not loud applause, gentle, respectful. Afterward, a young teacher approached. "My sister's going through something similar. Hearing you helped." That, more than the verdict, felt like victory. 2 months later, a letter came from the correctional facility. The handwriting was unmistakable, steady, deliberate. "Emma, I wanted you to know I've been thinking about everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to tell the kids I'm sorry. I thought revenge would make me feel powerful. It only made me empty. I read it twice, then folded it away. Maybe people change. Maybe they don't. But I no longer needed the answer." That summer, the neighborhood hosted its annual picnic. For years, I'd avoided it. But this time I went. Olivia ran off with her friends, Max chased Bubbles, and I stood under the maple tree, the same kind of tree that had shaded our old house. Marcy handed me lemonade. "Feels different this year." "It does," I said. "Quieter." She looked at me. "You're stronger than you think," I smiled. I think I finally believe that. Later, as the sun dipped low, one of Daniel's former clients approached. "Mrs. Harris, I wanted to say thank you. You saved a lot of us from losing money." His words surprised me. I'd spent so long feeling like a victim that I'd forgotten truth protects others, too. Driving home that night, windows down, the air smelled of grass and barbecue smoke. I thought about how far the road back had been. Healing isn't linear. It's a slow unwinding of fear until you can breathe again. One evening, Olivia came into my room holding a drawing, our family, stick figures under a bright sun. She'd drawn Daniel too, standing off to the side. "I didn't want to erase him," she said. "Because he's still my dad," I nodded, throat tight. "That's okay, honey. We don't erase people. We just stop letting them hurt us," she smiled. "Then we're okay." "Yes," I said. "We are." By fall, I started volunteering at the community garden behind the library. Digging in soil, watching new life push through, became therapy I didn't know I needed. One Saturday, Max planted a small maple sapling. "So we always remember the good trees," he said. I laughed softly. Exactly. Growth, I realized, isn't loud either. It's patient. It's the quiet persistence of roots finding space again. That night, sitting on my porch, I watched the moon rise over our small yard. The world still carried scars of what happened. Legal documents, headlines, memories. But inside, something peaceful finally took hold. Daniel's name no longer lived at the edge of every thought. It had become a chapter, not the book. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, not for him, but for us. For the children. For anyone who's ever been betrayed and still chooses kindness. Because in the end, justice gives you balance, but grace gives you rest. A year had passed since the trial. Sometimes I still woke at dawn expecting the old weight in my chest, the one that used to press before every argument. Now, mornings carried a lighter sound. The clink of 2 cereal bowls, the hum of the kettle, Olivia humming while brushing her hair. Our little house had grown into a home. Paint chipped here and there, the yard still patchy, yet it was ours. Earned, not given. I found a quiet pride in fixing things myself. Changing a light switch, trimming the hedge, even painting the mailbox blue. One Sunday, Max helped me assemble a second-hand bookshelf. He handed me screws one by one, serious as an apprentice. "Mom," he said, "you're really good at this." I smiled. Guess I had a good teacher. Life. By spring, I received the promotion to full principal. When the superintendent shook my hand, he said, "You lead with steadiness, Emma. That matters." The job meant longer hours, but it also gave me something deeper. A sense that the chaos hadn't broken me. It had carved me into someone clearer. In staff meetings, when young teachers spoke about difficult students or failing lessons, I would remind them, growth rarely looks graceful while it's happening. Every time I said it, I heard my own echo. I kept seeing Janet, the therapist. We didn't talk about Daniel much anymore. We talked about boundaries, about guilt, about the quiet art of trusting again. One afternoon, she asked, "Do you think you've forgiven yourself?" The question startled me. I never thought I needed to, she smiled. Forgiveness isn't only for others. You blamed yourself for staying, then for leaving. That's a heavy loop to live in. That night, I sat on the porch, the journal open on my knees, and wrote, "I forgive the woman who wanted to believe." She did her best with what she knew. Laura introduced me to a group of women who met every other Friday. Teachers, nurses, one retired police officer. They weren't the polished couples from my old neighborhood. They were real, loud, sometimes messy. We laughed until our sides hurt, traded secondhand novels, compared notes on parenting and bills. One of them, Grace, said over coffee, "You can tell when someone's been through fire." They don't flinch anymore. I liked that. I didn't want to flinch again. Late that summer, I ran into Daniel's sister at the farmer's market. We hadn't spoken since everything happened. She looked uneasy. "I heard he's out early for good behavior," she said. I nodded. "I hope he finds something honest to build." She studied me, surprised by the calm in my tone. "You're not angry?" "No," I said quietly. Anger built enough walls. I'm done living behind them. When she walked away, I realized I meant it. Every evening after the kids went to bed, I wrote short notes to my future self. Little things. Remember the garden smells different after rain. Buy Max's science kit. Say yes to laughter even when it feels strange. Those notes became a roadmap for healing. I hadn't gone to church in years, but one Sunday I felt the pull to sit in the back pew again. The pastor spoke about grace, not as forgiveness from others, but as the quiet permission to start again. When the choir sang, I closed my eyes. Tears came, not from sadness but release. For the first time, I wasn't asking why me. I was whispering thank you for bringing me through. It happened slowly. A new teacher joined the school, Ethan, mid-40s, widowed, kind eyes. He never asked about my past. He noticed small things, that I liked black coffee, that I always stayed late fixing bulletin boards. One evening after a parent-teacher night, he said, "You carry peace like someone who's fought hard for it." I laughed softly. Maybe I have. We began walking to the parking lot together, talking about books and the smell of chalk dust. I wasn't ready for romance, but friendship felt good. Gentle. Safe. Sometimes healing is simply learning to be seen without fear. In the fall, Olivia's teacher sent me her essay titled My Hero. She had written, "My mom taught me that when everything falls apart, you can build again." She didn't yell. She worked. She made pancakes. She smiled even when it hurt. I sat at the kitchen table and cried, not from pain, but from recognition. Children always see the truth clearer than adults. One Saturday, the kids asked to see their old home. The house had new owners now. Different paint, trimmed hedges, same maple tree. We stood at the curb. Max whispered, "It's smaller than I remember." Olivia squeezed my hand. "Can we go now?" Driving away, I realized the same thing. What once looked like the whole world had become just another address. Closure isn't about standing where pain happened. It's about walking past it without stopping. By winter, the community garden was thriving. The small maple Max planted had grown sturdy enough to survive frost. I touched its bark, feeling life beneath my fingertips. "I guess we made it," I whispered. The rain began to fall, gentle and clean. I didn't run for cover. I let it wash over me. Cold, grounding, real. That night, after tucking in the kids, I sat by the window with tea. The house creaked softly, wind moving through the trees. I thought about everything. The girl who believed love meant endurance. The woman who learned it also means letting go. Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the acceptance that pain doesn't define the rest of your story. I closed my eyes, whispered a small prayer, and finally felt what I'd been chasing for years. Stillness that stayed. A full year after Daniel's release, life had settled into gentle rhythm. The morning air smelled of rain and coffee. Max's backpack thumped down the stairs, Olivia's laughter echoed from the kitchen, and somewhere between their voices I felt the pulse of a new life. Steady, ordinary, precious. Sometimes the past drifted back like distant thunder, but it no longer scared me. It reminded me how far we had traveled. The scars of betrayal had become soft now, almost tender. Reminders, not warnings. When I caught my reflection these days, I saw a woman I recognized. Not the version that needed saving, not the one pretending strength, but the one who had earned it. One quiet afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was Daniel. He looked older, shoulders rounded, eyes dulled. A different man from the one who once walked through life certain of his control. "I didn't know if you'd open the door," he said. "I almost didn't." He nodded, gaze dropping to the porch floor. I came to apologize. Not to fix anything, just to say I finally understand what I broke. Silence stretched between us. The wind rustled the maple leaves, the same tree Max had planted last year. I said, "You don't owe me an apology anymore." He blinked. "Then why does it still hurt?" "Because regret means you've started to feel again," I answered. "That's its own punishment." He nodded slowly. "Tell the kids I'm trying to be better." "I'll tell them," I said. "But they already learned their lesson. From watching me." He left quietly, the sound of gravel crunching under his shoes fading into the afternoon. And just like that, the last tether loosened. That evening, while folding laundry, I realized something simple. Forgiveness isn't one grand decision. It's the daily choice to stop letting someone else's darkness block your own light. For a long time, I'd thought revenge was strength. Then I thought survival was... Now I knew that peace, quiet, consistent, unshakable, was the greatest strength of all. Spring came again. The maple tree outside our yard bloomed early, its branches heavy with new leaves. Olivia turned 10, Max lost another tooth, and laughter returned to the dinner table. Ethan, the teacher from school, joined us once in a while. Still careful, still gentle. He brought fresh bread one evening and helped me fix a leaky faucet. When he left, Olivia whispered, "He smiles at you like Daddy used to, but nicer." I laughed. Then maybe that's enough for now. Late at night after the children slept, I often sat at my desk writing small reflections. Pieces of advice for the woman I once was. Don't ignore your instincts. Love doesn't require blindness. Silence can be powerful when spoken from peace, not fear. Those pages began to form a story, not about betrayal, but about healing. One day I thought maybe I'll share it. Maybe someone out there needs to hear that falling apart isn't the end. On the anniversary of my leaving, I walked to the lake alone. The water shimmered under afternoon light, calm and endless. I remembered standing on this shore years ago, wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. Now I smiled at that memory, not out of pride, but gratitude. Sometimes survival looks like breathing through another day. Sometimes it looks like standing by still water and knowing you are safe. Before heading home, I whispered a prayer, not for revenge, not even for closure, but for everyone who's ever trusted the wrong person and still found courage to trust life again. Because that's the miracle people never talk about. Not that we survive heartbreak, but that we keep our hearts open afterward. When I look back now, I don't see tragedy. I see lessons carved deep into the grain of everyday moments. The mornings I couldn't get out of bed, the evenings I learned to laugh again, the day my children stopped being afraid. If you're listening to my story and carrying your own kind of hurt, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me. Healing is not about forgetting. It's about remembering without trembling, and forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't a gift you give the person who broke you. It's the gift you give yourself when you decide their story no longer owns yours. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. It took me a long time to find the courage to tell it. Not because I was ashamed, but because pain looks different once you survive it. It becomes quieter. It becomes a kind of wisdom you carry gently. When I think about the woman I was, the one standing in a kitchen holding a hotel receipt, or the one packing her children's clothes while pretending not to cry, I wish I could tell her what I know now. That forgiveness doesn't always mean staying. That leaving can be an act of love, for yourself, for your children, for the life waiting to begin again. Sometimes the hardest thing you will ever do is choose peace over proof. Because the truth doesn't need you to defend it forever. It just needs you to live in it. I've learned that love without respect isn't love. That silence can be healing when it comes from peace, not fear. And that life, no matter how shattered, has a way of rebuilding itself around honesty. So if you're listening to my story tonight, maybe with your own heart cracked open, I hope you remember this. You are stronger than the version of you who still believes it's her job to fix what someone else broke. You don't owe anyone your pain just because they once gave you love. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens every morning you get up, make coffee, and decide that yesterday's hurt will not own today's breath. If you were me, would you have forgiven him the second time? Would you have stayed long enough to watch him fall or left sooner to rise yourself? Tell me what your heart says. I'll be listening. And if this story reached you, remember to stay kind, stay honest, and never mistake endurance for love. Because sometimes walking away isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of becoming who you were meant to be all along. Thank you for being here. Until next time, take care of your heart and of each other.